welcome to Keep the Bastards Honest, the podcast of the Australian Democrats. I'm your host, Elana Mitchell, and on this episode, we're smart enough to love science. Greg Wah is the co-host of my favourite podcast, Smart Enough to Know Better, a podcast of science, comedy and ignorance. And I've been wanting to chat to him for a long time about science and why it's so important to our policymaking and governance. When I first asked Greg to come onto the podcast, his instinctive reaction was to say, "Oh, no, I can get you real doctor scientists. You don't need to settle for me." And listeners, rest assured, I'll be taking Greg up on his very kind offer of giving us doctor scientists to talk to. In fact, we have quite a few of them in the Democrats already. But I wanted to talk to Greg about science as a science communicator and enthusiast, rather than as a research scientist. That said, we're not exactly slumming it with Greg, as he is an astrophysicist, just not a research one. Apparently, there's a hierarchy. Something to keep in mind is that we recorded this in the first week of January, when the Omicron COVID outbreak was at its height, and Greg and I were still living in the independent sovereign nation of Australia, with our borders closed to the rest of the country. This informs the discussion we have on COVID and vaccinations. And even though it was only a couple of months ago, so much has changed in the discourse around COVID, in that the media has essentially lost interest in the pandemic and seemed to have decided it's over. I decided to leave it in as a snapshot of where the country was and a reminder that even though we all want it to be over, the pandemic is still with us and still impacting us. It's something to think about as the federal election approaches us. Greg is an incredible communicator, a delightful and very funny human being, and I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as Steve and I enjoyed talking to Greg as we recorded it. Greg, Steve and I pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land upon which we met and their elders past and present. Sovereignty never ceded.
I've got a question for you, Greg.
Please, yes.
Like I'm curious, which is there anything, as we sort of sit here at the beginning of 2022, is there anything in the world of science that you are particularly looking forward to over the next 12 months?
The big one at the moment for me in the astrophysics realm is the James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST, and that's in space, heading to the Lagrange point where it's going to be in orbit around. It's opening up its solar sails at the moment, its barrier sails. It's going to be the world's most powerful telescope up in space, and it'll be like 10 meters across, technically, this giant mirror, which compared to Hubble, the Hubble Space Telescope, that was 2 meters across. So this thing's going to be ludicrously powerful. That's going to see the world in infrared and in a way that we've never seen it before, and see further away for distant galaxies. That's the next big thing. It's like 10 years delayed, so finally it's here. And it seems to be working quite well. Well, it hasn't. It's being deployed right now, and this is going to take weeks to deploy it, and then months to test it and make sure it's running. But we'll start seeing stuff in 2022 because it didn't blow up on the launch pad. It doesn't look like it's going to fly off into space and get lost forever. If it screws up, it's so far away that we can't get to it. Unlike Hubble, where we could put glasses on it and fix the optics. If there's something wrong with the JWST, that's it. We just go, bye, $2 billion, bye, love you, thank you enjoy the flight into space, and that's the end of it. So yeah, the JWST is the most exciting thing in science for me. I should say something else. I'll get in trouble otherwise. The other thing is we're finally turning soil for the SKA, the Square Kilometre Array, over here in Western Australia. The world's largest radio telescope with the SKA consortium. There are a number of countries involved, 11, 14. I can't quite remember anymore, but lots of countries. The SKA low is being made here. So imagine a Christmas tree and a Hills hoist had a baby. That's kind of what it looks like. And it basically is 131,000 or so of these antenna spread across the Western Australian desert, and it'll be looking for unbelievably low radio frequencies, low energy radio frequencies, allowing us to see stupidly early, much earlier than the JWST, which only sees in dirty old infrared. But we only turn the soil sometime this year, and it'll take 5 years to build. That's a bit cheating. If it's not 2022, but it'll take about 5 years to get it fully constructed.
You actually helped build the SKA, didn't you?
No, I I work for an organization that's instrumental in the SKA. Yes, I helped in a very small way in one of the precursor telescopes, one called the MWA, the Murchison Wide Field Array. And when I say, once again, I know astrophysicists will be very angry at me. What I'm saying is I was very lucky to go out into the Murchison region and help with the adding to the core, adding the little robot spiders, basically, the little dipoles antenna out there. So I was grunt work, moving things into the desert and moving it around. So yes, I helped, but I'm just going to really point out that I just lifted heavy things.
Well, look, that is technically correct, which, as your podcast tells us, is the best form of correct.
That's true. Yes, I just worry that someone might listen to this and go, "Oh, Greg, we're going to have a chat to you later on about this."
Sorry.
Without those heavy things, Greg, would the array have worked?
No, absolutely not. It would take a lot. It would have
central to the success of the array.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, that's fine. That's okay. They would have to have paid a PhD student a lot more than they have to pay me. So I saved Australia money. There you go.
There you go.
Done. Thank you.
And without you, the SKA wouldn't work.
Well, on some. Oh my goodness, I'm going to get in so much trouble.
So yes, I'm
going to take it. Without me, the SKA would never have happened.
There you go.
Can we come back to the James Webb Telescope for a moment?
Absolutely.
So it is sitting in the second Lagrange point.
Yes.
Which is 1.5 million kilometers away from the sun, directly behind the Earth, right?
Yes. Yep.
And if I understand correctly, that's so it can face away from the Earth, and essentially the Earth creates a shadow for it. It's
a balancing point. It's around because of the Earth and the sun and the way that gravity interacts around them. There are and the moon as well, to a point. There are these little points in space that you don't need a lot of energy to stay in those points. You go to that point and then you only need a little bit of thruster changing to move it back and forth. So this will be an orbit around a patch of space that's easy to stay around. But as you said, it's so that it doesn't get blinded by the sun. The Earth won't block it. It's so far away. The Earth will be like it has a massive shield, and that sun shield that its camera and all its instruments face on one side will be perpetually in darkness for the rest of its existence, and then the other side will have the sunlight on it. So otherwise you got to keep it really, really cool. For infrared cameras, you got to have active cooling, and you run out of it. And when it's fine if you want to build it around the Earth. I mean, Spitzer, there's the Spitzer telescope that does infrared, and it uses coolant. But you can go and add more coolant if you need to, because you can go. I don't think they did actually, but you can go up there and you can add more coolant. This thing, JWST, is too far away, so it is going to be passively cooled by just sitting in the shadow of space and keeping its sun shield between the sun and its very, very sensitive instruments. So as long as it can maintain that orientation to the sun, it can work. And they said, to begin with, about 6 years of operation, which isn't a lot. It really worried me. But they've done such a great job in launching it that they've saved propellant from the launch. Now they're saying 10 plus years. So they've already upgraded it. But I think it's because the scientists, like with the Mars rover, they go, this will last 9 months, like Spirit and Opportunity, and then a decade later it finally dies. I think they just lowball it, and then it's like Scotty from Star Trek. It's like when the captain says, how long will it take you to do it? You say, Captain, it'll take a day at least, in a terrible Scottish accent. And then you do it in 4 hours. Everyone's like, you're a genius. Yeah, yes, wow. I am. So always, kids, remember, under promise, over deliver, and the world is your oyster.
Yeah. Because isn't it like Voyager is still transmitting back to us like decades after we thought we would lose
Voyager's
contact
like
with
my
it.
age, and it's still
and
it's still doing. It's like still being more useful to science than I am. So that's
the whole awesomeness of stuff that we think will, as you said, will last 9 months. We're going to go, we'll send a rover to Mars to do this one little task that we would really, really like it to do, and then a decade later it's still chugging along. But I remember,
and nowadays you can send it more software and update its software and teach it to do something it couldn't do before, which is all very new, and it's very, very cool. That's how they get a lot of this stuff. But you have to be careful, because if you try and flash your router, change your router and it screws up, you're like, and you call your friend and you fix it, and you get it done. But if you fry it on Mars, that's it. It won't talk to you anymore. You can't point your antenna anymore at it, and it's gone. So they have to do everything really carefully. Like they have to little changes, and that's why a lot of this technology. You look at the technology; it isn't new. It's not like we plugged in the iPhone 13 because that technology may break down. It hasn't been tested properly, so you have to send sometimes decade-old technology into space. So by the time they design it and then launch it, and then it's in space, you're going, why do they send 2 decade-old technology? Why is it run with like spitwire and cans and things? And why does it only have like 10 megabytes of memory and no webcam? And because it didn't exist when it was designed back in the early 90s, that's all. Or even the aughts now.
So is the shameful secret that a lot of the Mars rovers are running on Windows 3.1?
I'm going to have to, I don't actually know. In all seriousness, I bet it runs on a Linux. I bet it runs on a Linux kernel. I would bet money. I don't know that, but I'm guessing it. They look like Linux people. You know what I'm saying? Like they have a Linuxy look about them.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing. That's a good thing. That's not a negative thing.
Oh, God, no. But,
working for them.
I was going to say that, but if they were running on Linux, surely they would have told us by now.
Every time.
True. Fair enough.
Sorry, as an IT joke.
All the Linux people just switched off.
That's right.
You complain to their vegetarian and vegan friends.
That's right. Sorry, Linux people, we love you. Without you, we wouldn't have, giant
everything.
Everything, yeah. All the things.
Telescopes, including Mars rovers.
Yeah, maybe, allegedly. I don't know.
So when do we expect the first images to come back from James Webb?
James Webb. I think it's about 6 months. I think it's 6 months before, so it'll be mid-year before they start doing real science. We may get stuff before then, but I would say people should temper their expectations a little bit because Hubble was a visible light telescope that could also see into the near infrared, and we got those amazing deep field images. But it was essentially our eyes, but better. Mm-hmm. This is a infrared camera. This is, and I think it can see also into the visible spectrum, but not much. It's actually designed to see through the dust and gas that there's blocked. And so I worry that people are expecting beautiful vistas of the universe. And you can, of course, make it when you make pictures out of radio images, you can do it. But it's not going to be, we took a great camera photo of space. It's going to be something else. So I only worry about that because I don't hear it enough when the JWST experts talk about it, and they you need to lower everyone's expectations on this because everyone's going to want the big pretty picture, and they may not get what they want, and then that can look, maybe I'm wrong.
Where will they point it first? Do you know?
No, I'm not sure. I don't know where the first targets will be. Something that JWST can do that Hubble can't do, which is pretty cool because of infrared, is obviously very, very far away, so really, really distant, like slightly red-shifted light from the distant universe, so distant galaxies, but also it's heat. So it can also look for planets in our solar system. So if you're looking for planet 9 or planet 10 or planet X, whatever they call it, the big thing that might be in the Oort cloud somewhere, this telescope will help us find it because it's looking for changes of heat, and this thing out there would be radiating slightly differently to the background area, and we'd find it. So I don't know what they're going to use it for, but it could be very, very, very close comparatively, or very, very, very far away, or both all the time. So, not sure yet.
No James Webb selfies.
No, you can't turn it round to point at the Earth because that would destroy the whole system because it would now have its instruments facing the sun and it would die. It just wouldn't work. Exactly. So it will never see home again. Oh, isn't that sad?
That's really sad.
Humans like to anthropomorphize things, so it's like, we sent it away. Halley's Comet came in 1986, and I was a wee lad in primary school, and we had to write a story, and there was a probe called the Giotto probe. They sent a probe into Halley's Comet to go past the nucleus. It was the first image of a nucleus, and my teacher actually took me, not just me, but the whole class, to watch the probe, like getting the first images back from this probe, which is pretty cool. Like that was pretty ahead of the time for the 80s. And so we've got to watch just these weird grainy images of this kind of weird landscape. You couldn't work out what was going on really because, bad cameras and all the rest. But we had to write a story. The teacher said we had to write something about this, So I turn this science now into a writing exercise. So I wrote the story about how the Giotto probe was like really excited and it was wanted to live its mission and would do proud by its scientist parents. And then it did this great science. And then it was like, oh, can I come home now, mum and dad? Mum and dad? Mum and dad? Mum and dad? And the teacher was like, oh, this kid he's messed up. Watch him. He writes this poor child being flung into space by the evil human race. Like, yes.
And then 3 decades later, you're doing a podcast about science.
Yeah, it does actually make a lot of sense now I think about it.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Whoops.
That's awesome, though. That is that's a beautiful story, though.
Very sad. Even back then I was like, how do you end the story? I know, with tears, many tears. I was like a 6-year-old going, I'll make everyone cry. Then they'll feel bad about things. Yeah.
Get them right in the feels.
Like, puppies and rainbows. I'm like,
So that's just.
Did you encourage anyone else to go into science as a kid, Greg?
Absolutely. I was very, there's a podcast, and I'm on a podcast talking about another podcast I was being interviewed on called Curiosity of a Child. And Anton, it's a great podcast. Rick and Anton. Rick is the father. Anton's their 11-year-old son. And it's a father-son. It's a great idea. And I really love that idea of a father saying, hey, let's talk about science and seeing it from the point of view of an 11-year-old. And they asked me to come on and talk about science. And I really enjoyed chatting to them. But being a science teacher and working with kids as a science communicator, I don't want to just talk. I want to throw questions to them. So I sort of said to Anton, hey, look, we're going to send people to Mars very soon. And there's a good chance they won't come back. Like, just you go to Mars and your bones melt and radiation. Is that cool? Should we send people to effectively die on Mars? Not straight. I'm not saying fire them into the planet, but
not straight away.
Not straight away, but yeah, they'll die pretty relatively quickly. Is that ethical? Is that cool? And this 11-year-old, I won't say what he said. You should go listen to the podcast. But he had to think about it, and he actually gave a really interesting answer, which may worry some people. But he thought it through, and I like the fact that this 11-year-old thought it through and he had an answer and he could back up his reasoning. So I think it's sometimes we assume that children can't think properly or they can't think things through. And I'm always surprised, not always surprised. I always tell people you will be surprised how much they do understand if you can help them get over some conceptual issues and how much they want to understand. And you have to beat out the love of science out of most children. You have to teach them badly. And maybe, I'm not saying people do it on purpose, but parents have, I've no time. Like I can't, I've got to put food on the table. I've got to
stop asking questions.
Yeah. I've got to stop asking questions. And most parents are great. Absolutely. It's a busy time. But when you don't have time, when you're under financial stress, when you have medical issues, when the world is full of a plague, like you just want to sit down and have a quiet drink and maybe sit with your partner and not have your kids going, tell me about that. I get it. But if teachers aren't there talking about it either, then you can lose them really fast. But they want to be scientists, and then we train them not to be scientists by the way we behave, which is hard, but it's something we've got to keep in mind. They don't learn to not like science. We teach them to not like science.
That's a really good point. Because just listening to all of that, I was sort of sitting back and thinking about my own experience as a kid and going, holy crap, I totally got taught to hate, like not taught to hate science, but I had the science beaten out of me. And that's why for me, listening to your podcast for the last decade has been really wonderful because it's reignited my love of science and it sort of reminded me, it's like, actually, no, A, it's okay not to know stuff, and B, there are a couple of insane idiots in Queensland and now in Perth who will share that joy and share that ignorance and discovery with you.
Yeah, we're not experts in it. Like we are not experts in any major areas, and we are generalists who are interested. My co-host Dan a long time ago made a good point, and that is, to drag people kicking and screaming to science, the first thing you have to do is stop them kicking and screaming. You've got to say, it's like a cat. You can grab a cat and yank it to where you want it to be, and it will go, no, I don't want to be there. But if you get a little bit of string or a treat and you go, woo, 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 and then they come to you. and it was their idea. And that's
Yes.
as a science communicator, really, that's my job. My job is not to research anymore or do that sort of stuff. My job is to say, hey, science is really interesting. And they're like, oh, well, it doesn't affect my world. And you go, oh, you'd be surprised. And oh, it's boring. And you go, oh, look, some of it is boring. I don't love all science. I am really not into, I'm not a biology guy. I think biology is super important. I think this decade will be the decade of biology, as in genetics and things like that. But I'm a physics guy. Deep down, physics is in my soul. So, but I understand it's important. But so I go, well, I'm not super into biology, but other people love it. That's great. So let's discuss that. And when I don't understand something on my podcast, I invite someone who's a biology person to come and chat to me about why it's important. I go, oh, okay, cool. Because I can ask dumb questions. Other thing, don't be frightened to ask dumb questions. As adults, we reach an age, become teenagers, and then we're like, now we have to be cool for every day from here on. And even the ones who aren't cool, like myself, we still have this level of you never look like a dickhead. I don't know if you can say that word, but but you must never look like that. Never. And you're like, no, it's fine. It's not acting like a moron. If you say something dumb, people say dumb things. And that's okay as long as they learn from that mistake, or they learn. It's when you say something stupid and you know the real answer is what irritates me. But that's a whole different thing. So it's just a matter of saying, I don't know. It's amazing how many adults, when you say here's a question and they say I don't know, or they won't say I don't know. They go, oh, I think it's this. And you go, I don't know. Let's find out, shall we? I don't know. It's funny to me. Just say I don't know, and then pull out from your pocket all the world's information on your phone and you can find the answer in 10 seconds flat. It's okay. You can do it. And then you can argue with strangers about it as well. Which is the best part of the internet.
Yeah. Thank you, Linux people, again.
And then you download pictures of cats.
Yes.
That's the other thing. All the pictures of cats you've ever wanted to see. Everyone just puts pictures of their cats online. It's amazing.
Yes. It's amazing how cats took over the internet.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty obvious when you look back on it. It's kind of.
I was going to say, is it really surprising?
No.
There are a few dots there I reckon we could have joined if we thought it through.
There's a lot of toxoplasmosis, and now we're sending their pictures into space. So, I'm just saying.
Yeah. No, just the age-old battle, because dogs always won the PR war about the whole man's best friend thing, and cats like, that's fine. We will just control the world.
Yeah. Well, if aliens ever came down and said we must destroy humans, we'll destroy their best friends first, all the dogs get vaporized. But then they would look at cats and go, no, you're cool. And the cats are like, sure. And then, they've got it worked out. Like, they know what's going on. They're close enough to us to get everything they need from us. Look, in all honesty, cats are lovely too. Let's face it, cats are lovely.
They're a joy.
They play it cool, but they.
Yes, my because I've had this kitten for a week now, and one of my cats passed away in June, which was devastating. But so my surviving cat, he's 10 now, and he's been sort of confronted with this little tiny ball of mayhem, and he's just got this sort of aura of a middle-aged bachelor, just going like, what am I supposed to do with a toddler? And and so he's the last week he's been wonderful with her. He's been very gentle and very, so he's been very accepting, but he just had this air of being just a giant grump and going, no, but then secretly he'll just lie there and watch her play with stuff. And it's like, secretly you're really thrilled, and like secretly you're really enjoying having this entertaining little toddler in the house. And it's the whole cat, I need to be cool. I can't possibly pretend to be overjoyed about having a new baby sister. So it's like a cat,
I don't think cats have ever gotten over being. They were effectively spoiled by the Egyptians.
Yes,
and they've never come down since.
No, they've never forgotten that they were once worshipped as gods.
Yeah. The expectation was set a long time ago.
That's right.
It's one of those wonderful things. I always like to think of like what ifs, especially on the podcast, but like what ifs. Imagine if cats were twice as big, like domestic house, because we wouldn't have them in our homes. That would be a dangerous animal to have around the house. That'd be like a puma or some sort of cougar or something like that. Yeah, a lynx. It would be a dangerous animal, and we wouldn't have them. So they're not they're big enough that we can put up with them, because they go, oh look, he's clawing my arm. What a cutie! It's like and we forgive them the violence, but they're independent. Like they had to be the right size for us to let them into our world as much as we have. Because it'd be dangerous. It'd just be dangerous.
Yeah, like from an evolutionary standpoint, it's just fascinating as how cats sort of just ended up at the, because I read a tweet once that's sort of saying that like, they're sort of like they're God's perfect killing machines, but they only weigh 8 pounds, and we keep picking them up and kissing them, and like no wonder they're angry.
Well, can you imagine back in the day if the Egyptians were hanging out and suddenly a pride of lions walked into their granaries and went, "Don't worry, everyone, we're going to kill all the mice." You'd be like, "No, that's not happening. No." And you get spears and you get rid of them. And it's just like these smaller cats came in and was like, "Okay, we'll do it." And you're like, okay. I don't think you could take my eyes out before, like while I slept. You're not. I know you're going to eat me, but I'll be dead first. Like you're going to wait for me to be dead, and then you'll chow down on me, which is fair enough. Why waste?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Because I think my favorite Twitter account in the world is the Giant Military Cats Twitter account, and so anyone who's not on Twitter or doesn't know about this perfect account, which I think is also on Instagram if you're an Instagram person, this genius photoshops domestic cats into stock photos of military equipment, and they're huge. So you'll have like an aircraft carrier with a cat door on the side that's been photoshopped in, and a normal size cat sort of head poking out, and just marvelous stuff. And it does make me wonder how we would cope with like Land Cruiser sized cats in our lives, because they're still big and cuddly and adorable domestic cats, but they're the size of tanks and things, and it's the best.
I like big dogs, so I'm nothing really against a little yappy dogs. Like yappy dog, you can tell by my terminology. I'm not a big fan of them. Like I like big dogs, and to the point where I used to say a dog I could ride into battle is a real dog. Like that's like a wolfhound, deer hound. That's a dog, and I love them. And I've had these sort of dogs, and I love those sort of dogs. And I'm cool with that. An animal that size is still a 60, 70 kilogram dog is a dangerous animal if it decided to hurt you. But I'm like, oh no, we can deal with that. If you gave me a 60 kilogram, 70 kilogram cat, I wouldn't go, sure, it could live in the house with me. I would be like, call animal control immediately. That's a predator of immense proportions. So yeah. There you go.
But I think, and that's a fascinating thing, because I think it sort of reflects the difference between the fact that we as humans domesticated dogs and we sort of have that cultural sense of, I guess, control and ownership of dogs versus the cats who essentially domesticated us. And, so to have like a 70 kilo cat in your house, there is that fear thing of that whole,
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? My adult cat Nibbler he's 8 kilos of pure love. He's a big cat. And that's a manageable size for a, undomesticated predator. He's chosen to tolerate me because, I give him food and he cuddles and give him toys and, clean out his litter tray. But Nibbler at 70 kilos would be a very different story.
I just want to throw into the conversation that a leopard weighs 25 kilos.
Okay, wow.
I would not be cuddling a leopard on the sofa, right?
No.
So
there you go.
Like those, like a leopard is the thing that, drags an antelope up a tree and keeps it there for safekeeping sort of thing. Yep. So,
there you go.
Yeah.
Wow. No. That's a really terrifying perspective.
You would get dragged up a tree. Exactly right. Yep.
Awesome. I never dreamt that I'd end up talking about cats on my political podcast. This is brilliant.
It's the only reason you set up this podcast. Come on. Was the opportunity to talk politics and cats in one episode.
That's right, my two passions.
Indeed. It's taken 7 episodes to get here, but here we are.
Yeah, that's it. This will be our final episode, guys. Thanks for listening.
We've peaked.
That's right. I'm done now. I've achieved everything I wanted to achieve. Back to
science.
Back to science. My God.
Back to science. What do you think? So I'm curious. And physics, yes, and mRNA as a technology. 2 years ago, first papers came out 2 and a bit years ago, August 2019, I think, first real paper that looked at mRNA-based vaccines as a thing that we could explore. A year later, first COVID vaccines using mRNA as a technology were in trials. It took a weekend once the genome was produced to actually make a viable candidate. There's been quite a bit of speculation and, talk about what else we might use that technology for.
Yeah.
That for me is one of the big areas of exploration in medical science and in biological science that we might be looking at over the next year or two. At the moment, I think most mRNA research is going to be focused around COVID, as you might expect.
COVID,
yeah. Fair enough.
Sure.
But there's talk about using it to address cancer treatments and other types of viruses. Like that for me seems like a really interesting and sort of future strand of science over the next decade.
Absolutely, I can't agree more. That's the thing. This is the century of biology. Absolutely, where the last century was the century of physics. It was. I think the big difference is they talk about things like protein folding and how proteins fold in a certain way, respond to the body in certain ways, like with drugs and things like that. And so we used to have to kind of brute force it or make them in labs. But now with machine learning and that sort of stuff, now you can fold proteins like virtually and just find and evolve the best proteins. And we don't have to do it ourselves, like evolve it in the computer basically. And we can make these things that respond in a certain way or do something better than before. And I think it's very, very fast. Computing just iterate these generation after generation after generation. And I think that that just opens a whole area of science. And we don't even know it's a tool that in the past you'd call like a tool of the gods almost. And it's in the hands of people now. And I like things like CRISPR, which is not exactly what we're talking about here.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And CRISPR, it's when you start thinking, oh, we can do these little things now. And you go, we're already modifying the genome of animals and plants, and the sky is the limit, really. I mean, and the ethics behind that as well. But that's a different story. Every technology can be good or bad. You can have nuclear weapons and you can have nuclear power. And, like you can sort of discuss different sorts of things. And there's very few bits of technology that are just for destruction. I think mRNA, people were very worried about that because they went, hang on, how come it took 10 years to get a vaccine or 20 years and now we did it in a year? You go, well, they threw all the money in the world at it. There's that's the big one. And we desperately needed it. And like Moore's law in computing, it's like computers doubling every 18 months. I know it's not quite right anymore, but the computing power is just increasing so fast. We can do so much quicker on them. Quantum computing is coming online. It can be tested much faster. We don't have to follow these old ways of doing things. And really what stopped us was the bureaucracy. But when the world went, we need the vaccine now, then we managed to make it safely and effectively. And everyone just get a vaccination. Please go get your vaccination. Thank you. All right. Just always say that.
No. Completely agree with you. I'm triple vaxxed and proud.
Oh, well done.
So
I'm waiting for mine. I'm ready to go. I just have to wait for my turn. It's because we all get a turn.
Yes,
10 days for me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. And then, and I hate to say it, another 6 months there'll be another one, and 6 months after that there'll be another one, and that's just the world we live in now. Just like your flu shot. But see, people didn't get their flu shot. I work with children a lot. I used to get a flu shot every year and I didn't want to kill anyone. Not many people did, and so they thought, "Oh, we never had to do this." Yeah, you probably should have been getting your flu shots as well. So this is just getting everyone up to speed of, hey, this weird disease. There are other weird diseases that you didn't care about that were wiping out people, 50,000 Americans a year or something like that to the influenza. I think it's maybe more, but it's like lots of people dying from influenza. So let's reduce it all. Hey, crazy idea.
Deaths from influenza in the US each year vary between sort of 20,000 cases in a good year up to about 100,000 cases in the odd really bad year. And those bad years come around every sort of 10 or 15 or 20 years type of thing. The worst one since the 1918-1919 pandemic was in the 1960s. I think it was closer to 250,000 people died in the US in that pandemic. Goodness. It was serious in Australia as well. But otherwise, you have these little sort of cyclical bumps. To put that in perspective, though, so 20,000 people a year dying from influenza who otherwise might not have died at all. Deaths in America average about 7,500 to 8,000 people per day. So an extra 20,000 people is, it's a significant number in the scheme of things, but it's an extra sort of 3 days, 4 days of their average deaths. Like not to make too light of the fact that 20,000 people are losing their lives, but just to put it in perspective. COVID deaths in America are now up to 858,000 as of sort of last count.
Yeah.
That's not the flu. It's
No.
not even, like it's a really serious disease outbreak. Go and get vaccinated.
Yeah, absolutely. When people say I've actually had people say, "Oh, it's just like the flu," and you're like, "Just like the flu, except it's 10 times more likely to kill."
Yeah.
It's nothing just like anything. Thank you very much.
No.
Stop it.
But I also don't think people really appreciate what the flu is versus what a cold is.
Mm-hmm.
I think when most people say, "Oh, it's just a flu," they really mean a head cold.
Yeah.
They don't actually mean the flu. A flu knocks you around badly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. Like, I had the flu once, and I think I was 18 or 19, so I was very healthy, but, sort of the ideal age to get a debilitating illness like that. And I was convinced I was going to die for about 10 days. It was horrific. And I was like, I remember finally leaving the house and going out, like just going down to the local library to take all my library books back and get some more because I'd read them all while I was dying. And just that little journey just drained me so badly. I always felt weak as a kitten and just absolutely hollowed out because it didn't occur to me that having been sick with the flu for 2 weeks would have hit me that hard. And it was really like it took me a good couple of months to get all my strength back and start to feel normal again. And that was the flu. And I've had my flu shot, sort of every time I've had it available since then for that reason, because I would not wish that on anyone.
Yeah.
And then to look at, and not just the immediate effect of COVID and like all these anecdotal stories that you hear of people who've had COVID and explaining to you what it's exactly like to have COVID. And then there's the whole long COVID thing. At least you don't get the long flu. You do actually recover from that and get on with your life. But, long COVID, again, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a scientist or a doctor or any kind of medical professional. As someone interested in health, in policy and sort of, governance and health policy, it really worries me. I really feel like we're sort of setting ourselves up for an epidemic of people with long-term, illness and reduced capacity because of just this particularly now and not to get political, but the whole let it rip thing that's happened over east and the massive spike in cases we've had is really quite terrifying.
We're going to see something now we've not had to deal with in the 21st century, even the late 20th century, but when you read books like Alan Marshall's I Can Jump Puddles, about a boy with polio, and we don't get to see that anymore. We don't get to see polio. No. We got rid of it. We've dealt with polio. But polio, for those who are too young and too pretty to know, it would put you in calipers. So it would destroy your mobility and it would really, really reduce your enjoyment of life. It was a major debilitating illness. And you would see these people with these metal legs and calipers. He couldn't jump puddles, the name of the book. And I think now, once again, I am not an epidemiologist. I just play one. No, I'm on television. No, I just, but I worry we're going to see long COVID and we're going to see the effects of long COVID in time. And it makes me sad.
One of the things I only found out recently, because like you, I grew up post a polio vaccine being widely available and us as a society, not only in Australia, but around the world, going through the process of eliminating that. Most people who got polio didn't notice. The vast majority of polio cases, people didn't notice. For the portion of people, there was a portion of people, and I think it was maybe in 10% of cases, polio presented as a gastrointestinal bug, vomiting, diarrhea, and it persisted for a number of days, and that's what it was for a lot of people. 0.5% of cases, there or thereabouts, experience the sort of neurological damage that you were just referring to, where it would impact feeling, mobility, the ability to control muscles, the development of people's limbs in particular. Like there were a range of severities there, but it was quite severe. And that sort of classic view we have of, a child with sort of calipers and braces on their legs was 0.5% of all cases. Right. Some people died from it. But it's interesting to sort of say, with that as the way in which the disease presented, we still engaged in a worldwide program to eradicate the disease. It was something that wasn't questioned. The minute that it was developed, people were queuing up to get it administered. There was no question about, but what about the effects of it? More people today would have experienced polio as a result of the vaccine than people who would have caught it. I think it's twice as prevalent now. That if you've received, like if you've experienced polio, it was because of the vaccine instead of you catching it. And someone sort of turned around and said the other day, if that happened today, we wouldn't bother. We would have all this palaver that we're having today about, but what's in the vaccine? And have you heard about the adverse impacts? And, we're not really talking about many people anyway. And we just wouldn't solve it. We just wouldn't go through there wouldn't be the political will, there wouldn't be the social will. You'd have this sort of ideological battle about, should we not? We wouldn't go down that path. But the numbers actually look similar to what we're seeing in COVID in terms of asymptomatic, symptomatic, and then serious, and then fatal.
Yeah. I think with COVID, if COVID was more visual, like visually terrifying, then we would have solved it much faster. Let's say you bled from your eyes. So you cried tears of blood. Let's just say that was a symptom.
More like Ebola.
Yeah, maybe not quite as evacuating as Ebola is, but even if it was just like you had something very obvious where you bled tears, this would be over. We would not be 2 years into this. We wouldn't be accepting it because it'd be terrifying. Everyone would be terrified out of their minds. We just maybe this is an Australian thing only now because of the horror that's going on the East Coast, which I feel very, very horrible for all my friends and family and everyone on the East Coast. And it's coming here to WA2, to a town near you very soon. It's actually affecting people now. People are experiencing it. For the first time ever, I've heard people go, I've got it, and Auntie May's got it, and Uncle Jim's got it, and the farmer down the street's got it, and the bus driver's got it. And you're like, somehow for 2 years we managed to minimize that, and now it's gone less control.
What are the cases in WA at the moment? It's still sort of single figures or double digits?
I think it's like 40. I think it's that low.
I think our active cases I think it's the last time I checked, I think was about 78, but that includes all the cases from coming in from interstate and overseas who are not counted as local community cases. I think like the last 2 days we've had 0 community transmission. Yeah, so we're recording this on the 8th of January. Yes, 8th of January, because time, what is time anymore? As I said to Greg yesterday when I was trying to work out what on earth we were doing. And so last night at 6 p.m. last night, some of our restrictions were eased, so we no longer have to wear masks in indoor settings and that sort of thing, which is very exciting. I happened to be at the pub and it got to 6 o'clock and the whole pub just took their masks off. It was great. It was very funny. And I realised I shouldn't be laughing about this in light of because Steve's in New South Wales, Greg. So, in light of what's unfolding in the East Coast, because again, I have friends and family in the East Coast, and I have a friend who sends me horrifying updates on stuff from Victoria, and he ends every text with, "Stay where you are. Do not leave WA."
Well, you can't. So.
Well, no, there's that too, but he's just like, don't even think about it. Just stay in your nice COVID-0 bubble and do not embrace what I'm going through.
We are very lucky to be in WA.
Yeah. So I'm in Sydney.
Oh my goodness.
In my suburb in Sydney, so just my postcode, we've had 304 cases this week.
Bloody hell.
Just and I'm actually in a pretty decent suburb in terms of being protected from it. It's not bad by any stretch, certainly by our standards over here at the moment. 36 today, 300 this week. So
wow.
We're more cases than the entire state of WA.
Yeah. Because the outbreak that hit us just before Christmas was Delta, which I think actually saved us. I mean, much as 6 months ago, everyone was like, "Oh my God, Delta is the end of the world." I think we were really fortunate that the person who brought COVID into WA inadvertently was infected with Delta and not Omicron, because I think if it had been Omicron, we would have been in a world of hurt. But we have actually got Omicron in WA now. Like a security guard who was working at a quarantine hotel was diagnosed with it. But thankfully, because he was getting tested daily as part of his job, they grabbed it the second he was infected, and he's obviously now in quarantine and everything else. So it was all handled very safely in that.
I think we need to change that phrase, quarantine hotel.
Yes.
I don't think they're actually, they're not really quarantine. They're hotels.
Yeah,
They're not really quarantine. They're sort of isolation hotels, maybe.
Exactly.
But they're not quarantine. Quarantine looks very different. It's set up very different. The ventilation is different. You don't pump air into the corridor. Like a whole range of stuff goes on. Howard Springs is a quarantine facility.
Yeah.
Whatever hotel you're talking about in downtown Perth won't qualify. Just like the Four Seasons in Sydney, or the Four Point Sheraton in Sydney isn't a quarantine facility either. Like we really have stuffed that up. The way that is set up a quarantine facility is pretty well known. It's pretty well defined, and we've had quarantine facilities for a couple of thousand years. Like we've known pretty much how to handle quarantine for quite some time. That's not what we're doing here. It's not.
No, and I have to admit, and apologies, Greg, we're going to switch to the political, but what has surprised and confused me with, over the last 2 years, because this time last year when COVID first arrived in Australia and we went, oh crap, what do we do? And the state premiers came up with the concept of the quarantine hotel. I always assumed that would be like a short-term stopgap measure for a few months while we built proper quarantine facilities, and then somehow that never happened.
That wasn't that to do with no one wants to spend the money. No one wants to spend tens of millions of dollars on building a facility that 10 weeks later you don't need to use. And so there's always that fear of, hey, if we build this, and then they'll say it's a boondoggle, and then I'll lose my election because of that. But what they didn't realize, 10 weeks kept passing, another 10 weeks passed, and 3 months would pass, and they never started because they kept expecting it to be over. And even now, like with the East Coast, they went, hey, we kind of dealt with Delta now. It's all kind of over, but not really, but it kind of is. Omicron came and kicked everyone in the bum. And so even now we're playing the game of it's not worth it. It's not worth it even now. Even I think the one in WA that we're going to build, that's been delayed now. That's been and I don't know why it was delayed. I only just read about it, but it's been delayed. And I went, okay, well, will this continue to be delayed forever?
But Greg, that's a very specific model of what a quarantine facility needs to look like. Now, I just finished saying we know what quarantine looks like, and it's got certain characteristics and that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be permanent buildings. We, like in other parts of the world, in response to a crisis, we throw up temporary facilities very, very quickly, housing hundreds of thousands of refugees, for example, who are displaced from war zones, displaced from, natural disasters, that kind of stuff. We build tent cities, we build the utilities around them, we provide them with power, running water, treeing facilities, and those sorts of things. All of that, is temporary. When the crisis is over, we break it all down again. It gets cleaned and it gets moved to the next crisis location or the next emergency location. In really bad circumstances, it persists for a number of years, like some of the refugee camps that I've just been talking about in places like the Syria-Turkish border, right? Like those things have been around for a long time, but they get spun up very, very quickly. We don't have to break ground and pour concrete and do all of this kind of stuff. That does feel wasteful, in some respects. We could have put up some facilities very, very quickly and been housing people for a couple of weeks in effectively glamping style accommodation and been way ahead of where we are right now. But because of that sense that it needs to look and act and be a certain thing, we're still waiting 2 years later.
Yeah, and I think the success of Howard Springs, we kind of tripped ourselves up with that, because Howard Springs, it was a repurposed facility. It was never designed to be a quarantine facility. It just happened to have the characteristics that made it a perfect quarantine facility, because it was a labour camp for, I think it was like either mining or gas or something. And it didn't happen to be in use at the time. So the NT government just went, okay, cool, that'll do. We'll just chuck people in there. And it just happened to be wildly successful as a quarantine facility. And everyone now looks at Howard Springs and goes, oh, we need to invest tens of millions of dollars, I should say, in something like that. And then what do we do with it once the plague's over? And it's like, well, as you said, Steve, it didn't have to be like that. And what really worries me with the Omicron outbreak in the East Coast is that everyone's going, you realise that Omicron is not the final variant. We're actually setting ourselves up to create an Australian variant, and there's no guarantee that that's going to be mild or less, transmissible or less infectious or less deadly. And we still don't have any quarantine facilities.
Either. or an mRNA facility, or.
Yeah.
We don't. What we have, it's been really interesting as a citizen of the country, and I'm frustrated too. I've been, just due to my job and due to my family, and I've been back and forth across the country and had to go into isolation, self-isolation, not hotel isolation, but self-isolation 3 times. And I did that with lesser degrees of enjoyment each time. It's not fun, but I understand it's a society I live in and I do it. And so I kept to the rules to try and help, just to try and help people. So even though I wasn't happy about it, it's been interesting to me. I keep feeling, throwing it back on the leaders of the country from on a state level and on a federal level seem to be saying to people, what do you want? And that's fine. That's democracy, I guess. You could say, well, that's democracy. Well, it's actually ochlocracy. It's mob rule. So, which, okay, that's a bit different, but that's a whole different thing. But I keep waiting for leadership where someone says, look, this is hard. We get it. This sucks. And I hate the fact that we can't go to Bali for a holiday. And I hate the fact that we can't travel here, that Aunt Gladys has to stay in Britain, that we all have to stay 1.5. This sucks ass. And I'm really sorry, but if we don't knuckle down and let it suck, then we're going to be letting it suck for a long time. And some politicians have a little bit to that, but there just seems to be this like, hey, follow me and I'll lead you to the land of milk and honey. And then when we get to the land of milk and honey, it's full of Omicron.
Yes.
and no one's willing to go. And because I'm not a political animal, so maybe I'm just being naive here, but I just get weirded out when a politician doesn't go, hey, look, I know 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago, I said X. This is an evolving situation. There's this global pandemic. You may have heard of it. And, but maybe don't be as sassy as that with the public. They probably wouldn't like it. But then you turn around and go, the information changed. Now Omicron is here. I can't let you out. We can't do it, everyone, because it's going to go really wrong really quickly. And when people go, you suck, and they will, they'll march on the street, or percentage will, then you have to go, why? We have to do this so we don't get, it's just going to happen forever. And I understand there's a certain percentage of the population that won't want to do it. And of course, there's always going to be a percentage of the population. Like that's always going to happen. And you just have to accept that and go, but most people will. I mean, I honestly believe most people do the right thing.
I think, Greg, that was one of the most impressive things about the way New Zealand handled the initial outbreak. So very, very early on, if you recall, New Zealand locked down hard for 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And they've largely been COVID-free since. But the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, sort of got on camera and said, this sucks. It's going to suck. I'm here with you. She was doing, sort of nightly video check-ins from her sofa in her living room, sort of sitting there in a sweatshirt in front of the TV kind of thing going, yeah, like that was a boring ass day and I can't leave the house and neither can you and I know it sucks and we've got, 26 more days like it and we're going to do it together.
They had Team New Zealand. I talked to, on the podcast, we've talked to people around the world and we talked to a lady living in Wellington and there's very much I won't say everyone, there's always an element, but they have this Team New Zealand feeling. But maybe you can do that with 5 million people. You can't do it with 25 million people or above. Maybe, and I don't know New Zealand well enough, so I don't want to speak for New Zealand, but there is very much a state feeling of WA is different to Queensland, different to New South Wales, is different to Victoria. Which one's best? Who should we listen to? Who's the Premier of Australia? All this garbage. And you just, there doesn't seem to be because let's face it, Victoria had to go through, we were locked down for 10 weeks in Australia. And then poor Victoria had to lock down for a lot longer than that. And then it's just this, I don't really have a point there. It just feels that it was all state by state locking down and
we didn't really try. I have to say, we didn't really try to create that unified sense of we're all in it together. There were moments there where it looked like we might, but we were very, very, and when I say we, I mean our federal government and our federal leadership were very, very quick to play favourites, to call out one as doing the right thing and sort of point to another and go, oh, well, if only you weren't a Labor government, we'd like you a lot more. Like there was that very real sense, unfortunately, And so that sort of, that idea of Team Australia disappeared very, very quickly. I think one of the other things that happened in New Zealand that didn't happen here and we didn't try was that the New Zealand government involved other parties in their decision-making. And our decision-making, our national parliament, but also at a state level, the various governments didn't really engage with their opposition counterparts pretty much at all. And it didn't really happen in Victoria, or it didn't really happen in Queensland. So I'm not just saying it's a Liberal thing. It was definitely everywhere where the government sort of took control and made decisions and largely sidelined their opposition instead of operating in partnership with them. And again, I think that undermined that notion of, sort of one team and being in it together.
Yeah. If it's like a war, if it was a war, like Australia was under some existential threat from an outside force, you would probably shake hands. Or maybe I'm naive, but people would hopefully shake hands across the divide and work it out and go, hey, let's put this aside while we deal with this issue. And when the issues, we can go back to backstabbing the heck out of each other. And maybe there was a fear of overplaying this plague, but you probably should. If you overplay a plague, you're probably going to do better than underplaying a plague.
Well, and I don't think you're being naive there, Greg, because when in the two world wars, we had a war cabinet, and the opposition leader was part of that cabinet and part of the decision-making process, and was briefed on everything what was going on. And when Morrison formed the national cabinet, quote unquote, Albanese's exclusion from that decision-making body was noted and commented on in the context of a war cabinet, and a lot of people felt that was a it was seen as a very, very political move on Morrison's part, but also a bit of a poor decision on his part. I mean, and look, as a citizen of Western Australia, I really can't criticise the sidelining of the oppositions too much, because we got rid of our opposition.
You don't have one. No, we don't actually have one.
No, we solved that problem by just eliminating them completely.
Yeah. But I think, Greg, you made the point before that in many cases we've been making decisions as though this is going to be a fairly short-run thing. That it's only going to last a couple of weeks. It's only going to last, and we still do it even at the beginning of the most recent outbreaks. We're going to have a short lockdown. We're going to lock down for 2 weeks. Actually, it's going to be 4 weeks. Actually, we're going to extend it for another 4 weeks and another, but the framing of the decisions are always these short-term things. It's a short-term measure. We're going to do this for just a little bit of time and then we extend it. And I think the sidelining of the opposition, again, if you knew that it was going to be a long-term thing, then you would have put in place different dynamics and said, actually, we need to form a partnership and we need to make sure that this happens, like in lockstep, and we've got that support, and we're going to put aside politics but it was treated as, I can score points here. I can make them look irrelevant by keeping them out of the mix. And here's me over here leading the charge type of thing.
And I think also the fundamental error that not just Australia and not just our government made was thinking that, as you said, Steve, the pandemic will be short-lived, short run. It'll be a few weeks, and then we'll crush this virus and we can get on with our lives. We can go back to normal. And I think governments around the world severely underestimated the simple fact that there is no going back to pre-COVID world. That world is gone and dead. And the concept of living with the virus, as various leaders have sort of put forward, it's a bit of a furphy in that their concept of living with the virus is basically just pretending it doesn't exist anymore. And we go back to pre-COVID life and everything's hunky-dory. And Omicron has kept going, we'll just hold my beer while I turn that little thing on its head. But living with the virus is actually accepting this new paradigm, this new world order that we're going to end up in. And living with the virus is looking after the vulnerable, making sure that our healthcare systems are up to scratch, giving people pandemic leave and leave to go and get vaccines, and giving them financial support when stuff goes terribly wrong and we have rampant spread of the virus and no one's voluntarily leaving their house to go to work because they don't want to die. It is literally reframing how society operates to live with the virus. And no one's talking about that yet.
Not yet.
Sorry to bring the tone of the podcast down a bit.
No.
Can we go back to the cats?
Let's go back to science.
Yeah.
Let's go back to science. Why not? Why not?
That's right.
Let's go
Come on,
back
Greg,
to
tell us how awesome science is. Like,
Wow.
so,
Dance, monkey dance.
You got
Put you on the spot,
15
mate.
seconds. Go.
Yeah,
That's
cell
right.
science.
Yes.
Okay. No, science is, people say, why do you like science in general? And you say, because science is understanding. And I think when you understand something, things are less scary. So in this, to tie it in with the plague, if you understand how it works, then, and how it gets into you and how it all, like, basically how it works. It may not save you, but it takes the fear out of it a little bit. And that's the same with everything in the world. I'd much rather understand how a disease in my body was working and what I could do to mitigate the issues than not. But everything else in the world as well, climate change, climate issues, that sort of stuff. How does that work? Why is that happening? Is it, why are we getting more extreme events? Why is every year the hottest year ever on record? And it's not because we all want to run around and scream and go, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. It's because I want to understand the world and then hopefully go, have you thought about X? and fix something maybe, or putting someone in that right place, or giving the right resources to people who can fix that, which is probably us. Everyone has to do something. But science is just the cheat codes of the universe and understanding how things work. And I think it's beautiful. When I look up at the sky, so my area is physics, astrophysics. So when I look up at the sky and I can see the moon in the day, and people don't realize that's a thing, and you're like, well, there it is. And then you see, well, why is it a crescent here? And have you noticed how that crescent always faces the sun? So it's never going to be the other way around. And you go, well, so why is that? And you go, well, that's because the way the bodies are in space and how they must be three-dimensional bodies or these spheres. So you start understanding that, gives you an understanding of the solar system. And you go, okay, so now you have a map in your head of the world around you and space around you, and things stop being inexplicable. And so you see something interesting in the sky and you don't go, aliens. You go, okay, well, what is that? What's going on? What am I seeing? How does it fit into my paradigm? How does this going to slot in? Maybe it's something new. Maybe it is aliens. It's never aliens, but it's,
One day.
Well, look, I want it to be. It's just never aliens.
Sure. Yeah.
So by learning about the universe, I find the world a lot less scary. When I walk around at night, when I go hiking, even though I made jokes about biology before, I understand how plants work and how animals work, how snakes work. and so just by understanding these things, you may just call it bushcraft. Fair enough. It's science. And it's understanding the universe. So I feel much less unsure of myself. Could I get water? Probably not. I'm a pasty white person, not designed for this country at all. But but at least I sort of a better idea of stay with vehicles, because the science says I'll have more chance of surviving and being found. So the world becomes a lot less scary for me because I'm not sitting next to a campfire with ghosts and goblins in the dark. I know what those noises are. I know that scream was a bird. It wasn't the soul of my dead grandmother coming to drag me to hell. Like these stories are fun. But by understanding, even not as a scientist, forget being a scientist. Not everyone can be a scientist. Not everyone should be a scientist. There aren't enough jobs. But just by having it, lay people, you should never say the general public, there's no such thing, but people who aren't scientists, if they can learn some levels of science in some area, the world becomes more understandable, less scary, and more fun as well. So that's my reason why everyone should learn science on a school level, high school level, and even beyond. And even if you're later, if you're out of school and you've never touched science, you have the whole internet. I mean, you can do it by yourself, but there's things like, I don't own these things, but like Brilliant and all these like online learning sort of programs. You can go and pay a subscription fee, but the same amount you pay for Netflix. You can learn. It's there. Now, admittedly, okay, money is a thing. Not everyone has money, but there's a lot of free stuff out there as well, and that you can go and learn. So yeah, I always say find something that you're interested in and just look at it for a bit, and you'll discover something new. And you'll discover something that you're interested in, and then you'll be able to have a conversation with someone about plants or space or puppies or COVID or the climate or trees, whatever it is about you. I'm literally just looking around the room now. Things I'm seeing in my eye line, I'm just saying those words.
Science for me is structured curiosity.
That's a great way of putting it. Yes.
And so taking a greater interest in science is simply about taking a greater interest in the world around you. As you sort of just pointed out, how do things work? Why is that thing happening the way that it's happening? Why is it not happening some other way? And then there is this method and sort of formal way of approaching the question and gaining confidence in the answers and making sense of the evidence that you see or hear or record or measure in some kind of way. I spent a bit of time as a younger man tutoring students in mathematics. And one of the things that you almost always have to overcome first, there's two things normally. One, I just don't get it. And two, I'm scared of it. And once you can overcome those two barriers, people find mathematics actually begins to make sense because they're at least willing to engage with the topic. You made the point earlier, you were sort of only half joking about it, that idea that you need to stop the kicking and screaming in order to drag people kicking and screaming to science. And I found that very much, this idea that actually, I'm just no good at it. I just don't understand it. Actually, I'm scared of it. Once you get past that, I always found that people would get at least, sort of 2 or 3 levels beyond wherever they were previously. And a lot of the work that I was doing as a tutor was to get people through an exam that they had failed twice before.
Oof,
it was sort of that sort of 2-strike, and I have to pass this next time, otherwise I'm out of my course type of thing. And they always did. They always got through it. But overcoming that fear was almost always the greatest barrier to it.
I always like to point out, though, I like to take back, because sometimes I feel like I'm blaming people. Like, oh, you should be more interested in science. People, and it is a little of that. But I think also we have like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you have the base needs like food and shelter and that sort of stuff. And it goes up to like higher and higher, like self-actualization and all the rest. But
then there's science.
And then no, you're right. Science fits in that self-actualization area. It's super, super high up, and that's exactly the point, Steve. Is we've got to, if people are too busy surviving and not being able to put food on the table, why should they learn why the moon goes around the Earth? Who cares? Honestly, and I get that. I am very privileged to be able to worry about the shape of the universe. I'm very lucky. And I accept that. But part of me goes, and I'm going to throw it back at your political podcast. What I want from political leaders is to create a system that allows people to self-actualize. And whatever that means, if that means raising a family, if that means painting, dancing, if that means science, I don't care what it is. Yeah. We have to get beyond surviving day to bloody day, and wondering whether we're going to have a job next week and whether it can put a roof over our heads and can young couples afford to have children and blah blah blah. That's all 18th century garbage, and we're still here in the 21st century having the same stupid conversation and blaming poor people. You're poor because you didn't work hard. That your parents, why didn't you get born into a millionaire's family like I did? Like, it's just garbage. And that's what I want from my political parties, whatever political party that is. Being a very agnostic here, even though I'm on this podcast at the moment, I want my political leaders to create a situation that I can get my basic needs out of the way, and then I will then go and thrive. Let me thrive, and I'll go do that. And if thriving is sit on your couch and watch Netflix, don't care. That doesn't matter to me, Gregoire. No. If that's all you want to do in your life, sure. I don't feel the urge to go, you need to better yourself, but I just want to give people the opportunity to, inverted commas, better themselves.
Yeah. I don't think we do much yet in terms of providing an environment within which people can thrive. And I do like that word in terms of measuring our well-being as a society, the success of our economy, the success of our social safety nets and the rest of it. If we are looking at individuals who are clearly floundering, who are clearly languishing, instead of thriving, then we're not doing a good job on those things. And once we create that environment within which people can thrive, well then, they are then in a position where maybe they will take up the arts, maybe they will take up languages, maybe they will take up science, maybe they will take up, the performing arts or something like that.
Yeah. They're going to go do a job. Here's the other thing. Let's get mercantile. Let's get down. Let's get into the money. At the end of the day, higher level thinking and higher level jobs pay better. and you're going to pay more tax on those jobs. And so on a purely, it's all about money. Having better, higher level or higher thought jobs or more higher skill jobs, that's a better way of putting it. You're going to get paid more on average. And so if that's all that the government wants is money from its citizens, setting up situations where people can get better skills and self-actualize, on average, all of society will do better purely for the fact that more money will get paid into the general coffers. Because most of us can't afford a millionaire accountant to make us get rid of our billions of dollars worth of tax. Elon Musk. So I have no problem with people making money off their skills. I'm a dirty capitalist in that way. It's okay to do that. But I just find it. I realize I was frustrated myself because I find it weird that we have a government on a federal government at the stage that seems to be about small business and about all this stuff, but doesn't want to set up a situation that allows people to actually be better at the stuff that they want you to. I find it, once again, I am not a political being. It just feels weird to me. It doesn't feel like they're doing it properly.
As a small business owner, I can assure you that this federal government is not for small business. They talk about being for small business, but by and large, they are not doing anything to support us, besides cutting the tax rate, which actually doesn't help. As a small business owner, it actually doesn't help me very much because that only affects profit. But all of the conditions that might help me generate a profit, at which point that tax rate starts to become meaningful, all of those things are being eroded, and including actually having a healthy populace who are able to go out and spend money, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
None of that is being taken care of. None of the investment in infrastructure is being taken care of. Like the investment in productive infrastructure that might help small businesses actually generate, the investment in training, the investment in universities that generate intellectual property and knowledge and know-how that you might then commercialize as a small business owner, the ability to generate export markets that would help a small business, export their produce or their products overseas. That's actually being actively undermined by this sort of continuing parade of foreign affairs faux pas. All of that stuff you would look at and go, actually, you are actively undermining my ability to be a successful business and operate a successful business. The profit part isn't going to matter. It's like yesterday, the federal government announced that they'll give 10 free rapid antigen tests to concession holders, but there's no supply.
Yeah.
It doesn't help. You can get them for free if you can find them, but good luck being able to go out and find them. And who are those concession holders? The elderly and the disabled, who are hardly in a position to go traipsing around the suburbs, scavenging through pharmacy after pharmacy and supermarkets trying to find them. Similarly with small business, cutting our tax rate that might allow us to keep more profit whilst undermining all of the means by which we might make that profit isn't really a very helpful situation.
Mm.
And Greg, you make you keep sort of saying, I don't know, I might be naive here, but I don't think you are. I think you're being very, very rational, very, very logical in going, why can't we have a society that is engineered to allow people to thrive? That's what is the purpose otherwise? And we
Yes.
we conducted a really fascinating experiment during COVID where we, doubled the job seeker payment. Literally overnight, with a stroke of a pen, we doubled that payment and we lifted thousands of people out of poverty. Mm-hmm. And the economy didn't collapse. Small business didn't collapse. All of these, bogeymen that have been put forward for reasons why we keep people in crippling poverty levels in order to incentivize them to go get a job and, help themselves. They were all revealed to be a lie at, practically overnight. But, and it really... And look, I might get accused of being a socialist hippie, but it really made me angry when we immediately rolled that back as soon as the first hint of the end of the pandemic was near. Because God forbid that we should actually allow unemployed people to survive, never mind thrive.
Live with some semblance of dignity. No.
Yeah.
No.
And And for me, because politics, I think, has similar problems to science. I mean, as you said, like, you were very honest about occasionally falling into the trap of shouting at people and going, "You should like science. What is wrong with you? Science is awesome." And politically engaged people fall into that trap too, because it's like, there's the eternal question of why do people vote against their own interests? And because, as you pointed out, on the hierarchy of needs, they are just surviving. They're just trying to put food on the table, trying to get their kids into school, trying to do their job and have a life. And they have no bandwidth to give the slightest care about politics, because they don't see politics as something that is relevant to their interests, even though it impacts every aspect of their lives. And so politically engaged, people, and particularly, and I'm going to call out the progressive side of the fence here, because we're really bad at going, you should be involved in politics. It's, this affects your life. And people are going, screw you, I'm trying to hold down 3 jobs and feed my kids. And so rather, again, blaming people for not being politically engaged and for voting against their own interests and believing the scare campaigns and the propaganda and the absolute bollocks that comes from our current crop of political leaders, there is an onus on the politically engaged to not make politics attractive, because God knows that's a bridge too far. That's we're not miracle workers, but make politics relevant to people and make people make it accessible and sort of, and I think, and as you write, and you are 100% correct in saying, what I want from my political leaders is a vision of society where I get to thrive. And I don't think that's a huge ask. I have spoken,
Beautiful.
It's done.
That's it. Thanks for coming, Rick. No. But yeah, so falls back into why I bailed you up and said, please come on my podcast and shout at me about science, because I think there are parallels between politics and science, and also crossovers, because politics needs science in so many ways. And as a science embracing and affirming party, it's key to who the Democrats are in terms of our philosophy and what we value. And from that springboard of science, then as a party, we get to go, well, our vision for Australia is to have an Australia where people thrive. That is,
Indeed.
Yeah, that's our, I mean, and it's I feel sometimes massively arrogant as a member of a political party that is not actually represented in Parliament at the moment, going, this is what we want to do for Australia. We make us a party of government and everyone will thrive. But, we need stretch goals.
You have a vision, which is in short bloody supply at this point.
That's right.
I mean, I like to be like, whatever the vision is, whether I agree with it or not, I like a politician or a party that can go, here's what we want to do. And you step back and you're like, I agree with that. I don't agree with that. I agree with this. I'm obviously on this side of the spectrum. I'm over here. I like that. Okay. When you're like, I don't know which way you're going to jump, I get a little bit spooked. And so just have a vision, have any vision. And then as a voting public member, I'll look at your visions and decide which one I will support. And that's a democracy, and that's how it should work.
Yeah.
Crazy, right?
I know, it's weird. Catch on.
Yeah. I think at the moment the idea of political vision is a little like the dark matter of the universe. We know that it's we know that it's there, but we just can't see.
Don't know what it is. That's right. Yeah, we can see the impact of it, but no one knows how to actually make it appear. Can I just say, with the talking about like thriving, I always like to point this one out to people, because not everyone is altruistic, and we have to be honest about that too, and say some people are in it for themselves. So here's my sale to any listener who's listening right now, who's in it for themselves, and you exist, and you're part of the society. If people around you are thriving, they're less likely to come and get your stuff.
Yes.
So if you're sitting at home and you've got stuff and they don't have stuff, they're going to kick in your windows and take your stuff. Because that's what happens. People don't. I don't blame people who. I've had stuff stolen from my place, and it's a bit scary, and I don't like it. But 9 times out of 10, I go, God, that person needed that thing that nicked, and they're going to sell it for drugs, or maybe not. They're going to sell it for whatever. They're going to sell it, and they needed it. They were willing to put their life on the line to take my bike, and then they're going to sell it to a shop for $50 or whatever. And then they're probably not just doing it to buy Bitcoin. You know what I mean? Like they're doing it to buy the thing they need, whatever that thing they need: food, alcohol, drugs, shelter, right? Whatever it is. But if you live in a society, once again, I'm just pointing this out to the people who aren't altruistic. If you live in a society that pays for these people to have okay lives, they're going to leave you alone. And you're going to be able to get on to accumulating wealth and doing whatever you need to do for you. And you won't be bugged anymore by these filthy hippies and thieves. So that's why you need to support it. Even if you're a selfish human being, support a society that wants to help the people around you, because then they'll leave you alone and you'll get on being a bastard. I mean, that's my sales pitch to the selfish. This is selfish altruism.
I think, Greg, as a pitch, it needs a little bit of work, a little bit of tightening up.
I think it would work. I have a horrible feeling that if I stood up in front of a whole lot of people and people of Australia, vote for me because I know you're a pack of bastards and you just want to get on with it, people would go, he's speaking some truth. All you need is no, we're not like the American system. We only need like 15% of the population to back you. We do need 50% roughly. Yep. So yeah, but okay, look, fine, Steve. I will bow to your political nous.
Look, we can workshop this.
Yeah, I just think a little bit of work, just a little bit of polish. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit awkward, calling selfish people bastards when our party's raison d'etre is to keep the bastards honest.
Well, look,
awkward.
No, I think it kind of works, isn't it? Keep the bastards honest, and then you just call everyone bastards. We're keeping you honest.
Yeah.
I think there is a nugget of truth in what you've just said, which is that a well-functioning economy, a well-functioning society, a healthy and thriving community is good for all of us.
Yes.
And the more of us who are being taken care of, the more of us who have somewhere to live, something to eat, something to engage our interests, the better off all of us will be. And if we're taking care of those who are most vulnerable, who have the least in our society, they will contribute to society as a whole in ways that benefits all of us. And when I say contribute, I don't mean economically necessarily. It may be artistically, it may be intellectually, but by addressing those needs that they have, just like all of us, then we'll all be better off for it. Like we absolutely will all be better off for it, much more so than if we find ways to put more money in the pocket of people who already have everything they could possibly ever need.
But I've heard this great idea called trickle-down economics, where all the money's going to fall out of billionaires' pockets right into my face.
Should we talk about science again for a minute?
Fair enough. Sorry, Steve. I've hit a raw nerve there. I apologize.
No, all good. It's funny because when to go back to the beginning of the podcast, when we were talking about the mRNA vaccines, Rick Morton from the Saturday paper had an amazing series on the lady who, her life's work was developing that mRNA messaging, and who was literally saved billions of people's lives now, and is principally responsible for the development of the mRNA vaccines. And eventually someone's going to make a movie about her life, because this story is absolutely wild, and I'll link to it in the show notes. But in a really brief summary, she had, and it's odd to use the word faith in terms of science, but she understood the science of mRNA in principle, and understood that this was something that we could realize as a scientific breakthrough, and literally spent decades trying to get there, like trying to find that breakthrough and get there. And she kept getting her research defunded. She was literally just moving around the world, going from job to job and university to university, grant to grant, to fund and pursue her science. And she got there. And it was BioNTech who developed the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, who eventually saw because she had the breakthrough and discovered how this could work, and that was great. And then BioNTech went, cool, come talk to us, and we'll hire you and help you develop your breakthrough. And then when COVID struck, that's when they just went, we could let's experiment, we'll use this for a vaccine. And then the rest is history, as they say. And you sort of joked earlier about the vaccines and everything is what happens when we throw all the money at the world at solving a problem. And we wouldn't have been able to do that if not for this scientist whose name tragically escapes me, and I'm very embarrassed because I should have looked this up beforehand. But Steve's currently doing it for me now. Thank you, Steve. It's always good to have a co-host as you back. So to bring it back into the whole thriving thing, this is why, as a society, we need to value science and the arts, and we need to value people who want nothing but to sit on the couch and watch Netflix. They perform a valuable service, because we all need Netflix critics and reviewers. How else are we going to know what to watch? And I just sort of think like her astonishing, like, because she just kept persevering, and this is what gets me, is that she persevered 4 decades to find this sort of holy grail breakthrough that she knew was out there and knew she could get to with the sufficient time and application of money and fun research to get there. And if we had thrown all the money at the world to her decades ago, I just sort of think like, where would we be now with the possibilities of what mRNA can do for us and all that sort of thing? And much smarter and much better educated people than me have talked about how, what we value as a society, what we value, what our political leaders value and our decision makers value is so very, very important. And the last decade or so, we've lived through successive governments who have made it very, very clear that they either value the wrong things or they value nothing. And we're seeing the fallout from that. This is why politics, for me, is important and ties into why science is so important to you and why science is important to me, because I learned from you and Dan. If we value the right things, we all get to thrive. We all get to benefit from it. And, I've sort of run out of steam on that one. But
Catalin Carrico is her name, by the way.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr.
Everyone write
Carrico.
that down.
Yes.
And to paraphrase the Hamilton musical, if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for?
Yes.
And that's the thing. If once again the whole tying with vision, if you have a vision for something, then you know where you're going and you know what you need, and you're not going to get sidetracked by silliness. You're going to keep working at it. I'm assuming that doctor, she now owns everyone. That's how it works, isn't it? She technically saved all your lives, and now she is the de facto ruler of the planet. I think it's how democracy works. I'm not a political person, so I'm not too sure how that works.
Look, it's a method of democracy we haven't tried yet, but I think it's
how many lives have you saved?
Yeah, that's right.
Excuse me, I have to go race out to the nearest bus stop and help old ladies and just get their votes.
That's right. But look, I think there's promise there. Like we could give it a crack, see how it works. Might take off. Who knows? I think putting Dr. Carrico, thank you. Putting Dr. Carrico in charge of everything, we can't be any worse than the leaders we have at the moment. With all due respect to the Jacinda Ardern's and Angela Merkel's of the world.
Sure. Yep. Hey, listen, I've got two quick questions I just want to throw at our science communicator just quickly before we wrap up. Fusion power has been 10 to 20 years away for a good sort of 30 years now. Are we any closer?
We are definitely 20 years away. A short 20 years from fusion power. It's fusion power is kind of like aliens, and the fact that it's not going to come until one day it's here. So right. I constantly read about, oh my goodness, this thing, but it always takes more power. Yes, there are fusion reactors, but they always take more power than they're putting out.
Which they're generating,
the opposite of, that's not a generator.
No.
So it is a big problem.
Yep.
And all I can say is Tony Stark is really letting us down by not giving us the arc reactor. So from Iron Man, he's flying around in a little suit.
Yes.
But no, unfortunately,
damn you, Robert Downey Jr.
Robert Downey Jr. in sexy ways. So yes, I don't think it's coming, and I hope tomorrow I'm wrong.
Yeah, it does feel like one of those things that it's going to be a decade away until it's here.
Yeah. Yes, and it will solve. That's to solve all the problems. I will want to say though, yes, fusion power. If we could generate fusion power and suddenly that stops, so we have this small fusion reactors that don't produce a lot of waste or any waste and can generate power easily. Absolutely, of course, game changing. Absolutely, we don't actually need it.
No.
We don't. Dr. Joel Gilmore, friend of mine, scientist, energy guy, amazing Australian scientist. He's actually done a lot of work on this. Australia we'll talk for Australia, can actually use renewable resources to power itself.
Yeah.
This is, and people are like, well, it can't be done. No, it's his whole job doing it. We don't need fossil fuels. We don't even need nuclear in Australia.
No.
We don't. And some countries might, we don't. So we don't need fusion. We've got this big fusion reactor in the sky that goes over every 12 hours. It's terrifying. It gives you sun cancer. We can just use that. I know, we should name it one day.
Didn't your podcast do that though?
We did. It's called Chad. So we named the sun. That's what we do in our podcast. Long story. Let's not go there. And but yes. So yes, we don't need fusion. But I still hope we'd get fusion.
Yeah, it seems like it. I mean, the promise of it is interesting. The availability of a lot more energy than we currently produce in a way that is clean and safe has some benefits. Okay, that was one. Second one, wormholes. Possible or not?
Oh, wow. I'm going to say no. And
no?
Why?
Yes.
So the idea of a wormhole is you have some sort of singularity, like a black hole, a naked black hole. So you wouldn't have any kind of, you wouldn't have an event horizon around it. That's already problematic as heck.
Yep.
And it links through space and over a long distance. And so you jump very quickly through this wormhole to another part of the universe in a shorter period of time than traveling through space-time. That's the idea of wormhole. As I said, the event horizon concept is really you have a fully naked singularity, and as a mathematician you're talking about before, that's not a thing. That's just not a thing, and it's very, very unlikely that that's a thing of any sort of naked singularity. Nature abhors singularities much more than it abhors vacuums. So the other issue is if it did exist, it would be tiny. It would be on the subatomic level, and to have a mouth that you could send anything through. I mean, start off with you're breaking causality, sending messages back and forth. But beyond that, if you wanted to send you, me, a cat through even a bit of matter, then you'd have to rip open it, and it requires something called negative matter. Which is totally theoretical, where that instead of having a mass that has a gravitational field that pulls everything together, it has a gravitational field that throws everything apart. And that doesn't exist. That's not a thing in the universe. It's a theoretical thing. So we would have to have a singularity be naked, which math says no, and we'd have to have matter that pushes instead of pulls, and that's against the laws of physics as we understand them. So as we understand laws of physics, no. But once again, like to be wrong.
I'm looking forward to that walk of shame.
But that point about the point about gravity, though, gravity I find is one of the things that I think before I die, we will realize that we just never really understood.
Well, you can. I don't want to say we definitely don't understand it. We can measure the effects of it, but we don't. It doesn't fit as the strong nuclear force or the weak nuclear force or electromagnetism. It doesn't fit into the four forces, even though we call it one of the four forces.
Well, it doesn't behave fit in terms of a force either, really.
No. Well, that's we casually get around that by going, hey, Einstein and relativity and space time. It's a curve in space time. Everyone, you're surfing the curve. It's great. And then you're like, well, that's marvelous. But then you have quantum physics, which is a great thing. You have relativity, which is an amazing theory, 19 decimal places correct, something weird like that, maybe even 23 now, like really, really, really correct. And then we have quantum physics, which is a very small, very, very fast, very, very small. And that's really, really good. Our computers run it and all sort of cool stuff. But those two things don't talk to each other. So when you get quantum physics to go big or your relativity and go small, they don't talk, which means we've stuffed up somewhere. But it's really weird. We have two theories that work so beautifully that won't talk. We can't make them kiss. We put them into the science closet and we go, kiss, kiss, and we can't get their lips together. It's very upsetting.
Yeah, but we have a similar issue, though, if you're the physicist, but if I understand correctly, we have a similar issue with gravity at a large scale as well. It kind of stops working.
We don't know yet.
Scales.
That's a theory. That's an idea that maybe gravity over large scales. That's an idea because that's getting into MOND, so modified Newtonian dynamics, and a lot of physicists will go, no, MOND is not a thing. So MOND is that's a whole other podcast we can go into. But yeah, MOND, serious physicists, and I'm going to really upset some physicists right now who are much who could crush me like a bug. Serious physicists don't really look at MOND. It's not it because MOND is in a way of getting around of dark matter, but dark matter has far too many. Dark matter kind of works, so we don't understand it fully yet. So MOND is probably not the answer. Once again, I might be wrong, but probably not.
There's something about dark matter though that feels like we're just inventing an imaginary friend.
Like philosophy. We had philosophy for a long time. We had this idea of this. We had this stuff, this ether that was around us, and it was this Luther. But the difference is we've seen the effects of it. So it's not just like the one I like to point out to people is our galaxy rotates, and it rotates. We can measure the speed of it, and it's rotating 10 times too fast. 10 times, and not just our galaxy, all galaxies are all madly rotating. And so we don't understand gravity, or there's something that's holding it together. So that's the first one. So you go, okay, well, that's fine. But then you look at, so you go, well, that was the first way we discovered dark matter, or the concept of dark matter. People go, yes, but maybe it's MOND, maybe it's Newtonian dynamics not working properly. But there's the bullet cluster, I think, or is it the butterfly cluster? I think it's the bullet cluster, where you've got, when you look at where the gravity is compared to where the mass is. So you've got these two galaxies that are crashed into each other, and you can see where all the visible matter is. By looking at the lensing of the light behind it, then you can say, actually, the gravity is coming from the space that nothing is. There's nothing there. And you've got the luminous matter is the stuff that's been blasted away. And it still has a gravitational effect, but only like 1/10 of what it should be. And you look at that and you're like, well, MOND doesn't explain that. MOND in no way explains this problem at all. But dark matter really does. There's just this matter that we can't, that doesn't seem to, it interacts probably nuclear strong and nuclear weak. It doesn't, and interacts with gravity, obviously, but it doesn't interact with electromagnetism. Why? Here's why. We need to get off our high horse as scientists and as human beings. We're not even, we're a teenage species. We're like, look at our cool mobile phones and our cool spaceships, and we can take 16 years to get to Pluto, and way, and we're making a big telescope in the desert. We're only at the start. This is the beginning of the story, the human story. Not even, we've chapter 1. Humans stop being dumb shits for a moment. That's where we are, full stop. We're still actually in that sentence. Yes. And we have the rest of human existence. I'm going to go a little bit metaphysical here for a moment. I think, when you watch the shows about aliens and they go, the big-headed aliens, big eyes, and they all come down and they probe everyone's bums. And that's like, and there's these ancient species. I think we're the ancient species. And what I base that on is the universe is only 13.8 billion years old. It's really young. It sounds like a long time. But the universe is going to be trillions of years old. It's going to be thousands of billions of years old. Red dwarf stars will burn for thousands of billions, where our sun will only burn for another 5 billion or so. So, it's all, and then there's whole gravity. So then there's black holes decaying, but we won't go into all that. Let's just talk about burning stars. We're at the hot, sexy start of the universe, where all the energy is and all the chemistry is happening. And I think we're going to end up to be that ancient species if we don't, wipe ourselves out. But, if we can get over these problems, we're going to be the old species going, hello, everyone. We need to check your anuses for things. Sorry about that. We didn't make the rules. And I think really where we're going to be. I mean, I like to think that sometimes where the period of history, as in galactic history, that chemistry talked. We're just talking chemistry. That's all we are. We're just chemical processes talking at each other and wearing cool shoes, to quote Douglas Adams. So I think in the future it's going to get more physicsy. Like we're going to have gravitational waves, and we're going to have like different types of intelligences, but not now, not in the chemistry period of history. So that's my answer. I can't remember what the question was, but that's my answer.
I love the idea that at some point in the distant future, humans, the human race out in the galaxy, discovering new civilizations, discovering new worlds, visiting those worlds, will be the aliens responsible for rectal probes and basically traumatizing the local populations. And there is nothing in our colonial history that tells me that we won't be.
Absolutely.
We will absolutely be those people.
Look, I'm sure it'll all be fine. It'll be us, or we'll send our machines. We may not get off this planet. Biology is a bugger, and as a biological creature, we just don't live long enough, and we're made of water, and we fall apart at the breath of a stiff solar wind. So it's really bad. But I think our children, as in our machines, will go into the universe and will be us. I don't, in the end, once again, controversial statement, in the end, I don't think there'll be any difference between humans and the machines that we make. They will be us. We will be them. And they're not going to kill us. I know you've got people like Elon Musk going, oh, they're going to wake up and fire all the missiles. You're like, did we make artificial intelligence? I saw your artificial intelligence behind you, Steve, wandering around your house before. And I'm assuming you made them, unless they're your housemates, and I apologize. But I'm assuming you made some artificial intelligences, and they haven't killed you yet. So is that, yeah. So they haven't killed you. We raise children all the time. Why do we think artificial intelligence is going to be different if we raise them as our children? They may dislike us. Not every kid likes their parent. They may think we're idiots, and they're probably right. But at the end of the day, we can teach them to be like us because they're going to be our children. Once again, maybe I'm a naive scientist guy, but yeah, that's it. And we're going to send our kids into space, and they're going to go, "Oh, our parents were so embarrassing. They were made of chemistry and water. They're super. They got cancer. They're just the worst. But we love them. Here's a picture." Another alien's like, "Great, please get your finger out of my bottom." Sorry, just class up your podcast there a bit. Sorry about that.
Oh, good. But no, you make it a cool because the instances of children murdering their parents in the greater scheme of the generations upon generations of humanity that we've had, very, very small.
Very small.
You know,
in fact, we wouldn't be here otherwise. If your progeny murdered you more often than you produce progeny, well, maths again.
It's a limiting move. Yeah.
It's It's just one of those things. So yeah, I think that it's people are like, oh, it's going to switch on and look at the internet and kill us all. And you're like, the internet's not all awful. Like, I know it's got a lot of Nazis in it.
There are good parts.
But it's got a lot of cool things as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I love the idea of us being the colonising aliens.
I bet you do.
And
sorry.
No. But
I've heard that about you, Elana.
Yes, first is restoring the Democrats to federal parliament, and then we take over the world,
then the universe.
That's right.
You heard it here first on the Australian Democrats podcast. They're going to take over the universe, everyone.
Yeah, but I can just see that, and we're going to end up being the literally the cat's paw of the felines of the world as they take over the universe.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Because you have all these probes going out of the universe and encountering new civilizations and things and holding up a phone going, "Did you see my cat?"
He's Mr. Toodles. He's a little woogie woogie.
I can see that. Like our robot offspring arrive with their artificial intelligence. They find a new world. They establish that it's... And then like a few minutes later, the cat arrives and goes, "Yeah, I'll have this."
That's right.
Yeah, this looks
pretty good.
Yeah, you can feed me now.
What's that? What's that thing? Is it valuable? That crystal thing? Smash. Oh, oh well.
Thanks, Greg.
That was awesome. Sorry.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on for our final episode. It was great.
Now that the Australian Democrats' universal conquest plans are out of the bag, they have to go into hiding.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
I'll be in trouble with my cats later on. They'll be going, "You're not supposed to spill the secrets yet."
You said the quiet part out loud.
That's right.
Get the toxoplasmosis into it. Really just pump it into it tonight. Goodness sakes.
Right. Oh, cannot thank you enough, Greg, for coming on and shouting at us about science and allowing us to shout at you about politics. It's amazing.
Excellent. Oh, the two deserve each other.
Thank you.
So if people have been inspired by your, stupid humans, embrace science rhetoric, where can they find you?
And look up Smart Enough to Know Better. So you can look at you type that into the internet, you'll find it as a podcast, Australian podcast of science, comedy and ignorance with Dan Beeston and myself, Greg Wah. We've been going for 11 years. We do fortnightly podcasts about all sorts of interesting stuff, exciting people from all over the world chatting about all sorts of cool things as well. You can find us on Twitter, SE2KB, Facebook. Look, you know how to use the internet. You're clever. You know how to. I don't have to explain. We're on Instagram. We're on all the things. We're not on TikTok because I'm not 15. But other than that, we're pretty much everywhere else.
Yes, we set up a TikTok account and then we looked at our young Democrats and went, that's for you guys to play with. Us old people are not going anywhere near that thing.
Yep.
And then a couple of our young Dems were like, we're not doing dances. We're
It's
not doing
floss immediately.
That's right. They're like, we're not doing political interpretive dance. It's like, and this is why the Democrats don't yet have a functional TikTok account. So sorry, TikTokers, we're working on it. But no, thank you again, Greg. And this has been wildly entertaining, at least for us. Hopefully our listeners will also find it wildly entertaining. Cat Twitter might be onto it. So,
No problem at all. Happy to chat in the future again. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
I cannot thank Greg enough for coming along and shouting at us so entertainingly about science. And for all that I achieved my ultimate goal of combining cats and politics, this is definitely not our last episode. It's an election year for starters, and we have a budget to autopsy. If you want to listen to Greg shout some more about science, you can catch him and his co-host, Dan Beeston, on their podcast, Smart Enough to Know Better, and on Greg's spin-off podcast, Wild Wonders Why. I've also added a link to Greg's interview on the Curiosity of a Child podcast, which is a great podcast and a wonderful interview. And you should go listen to it now that you're finishing up with ours. I've also added links to the Saturday paper articles about our New World overlord, Dr. Kariko, and her work on the mRNA messaging that brought us the COVID vaccines. One of the signature features of SE2KB is that Dan will drop outtakes from the episode in after the credits, and so I've done the same on this episode as my homage to Dan and Greg, because without them instilling in me an abiding love for podcasts, this one probably wouldn't exist. So I totally blame them. It's their fault. We'll have another episode out very soon, as Steve and I will be reviewing the budget, and Rhiannon Kerno from the Young Democrats will be joining us to provide the perspective of the youth. For those of you who've not been following the budget coverage, this one has the distinction of being quite bad and yet weirdly, completely forgettable all at the same time. So this discussion will be fun. And as we count down to the calling of the election, we'll have lots of news and new Democrats' voices for you to listen to. So stay tuned. Keep the Bastards Honest is brought to you by the Australian Democrats. This episode was edited and produced by me, Elana Mitchell. If you'd like to keep in touch, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn by searching for Australian Democrats. And you can see what we stand for, what we value, and what our policy positions are at our website at democrats.org.au. Until next time, thanks for listening. Being the Democrats, we are a party of science. We are, we embrace the scientific method. We accept that as, the best method of understanding how the world works, and as part of our quest for evidence-based governance. And it's like in this day and age where stuff that I thought would be settled and we would accept that science, yeah, you know where I'm going with this. I mean, we're a political podcast, and our job is trying to make politics accessible to people, because politics is the one area that people are like, do not want to get involved, do not want. But I think science suffers from that a little bit as well, because it's probably perceived as being an impenetrable, nerdy, thinky stuff. And the one thing that SE2KB does really, really well is peels away the impenetrable and make it really cool and fun and interesting.
Oh, thank you.
So,
it'd be great to have a whole podcast where neither Dan nor I had to do anything for it, except maybe edit it at the end, and they put it all together for us. Well, we put it together for them, but they record everything and just send. Look, I'd be happy to do that.
That could work.
Look, that's a good idea.
Franchise it.
Yeah.
SE2KB, the franchise.
Just do an intro and an outro.
That's true. Hi, I'm not
special guest today.
That's right. Yes, I'm not Greg, and I'm not Dan.
Look, I mean, we've just started our podcast, so we don't have a large listener base yet. But the most feedback I've had on the podcast is people who've joined the party coming through saying that they joined because of the podcast.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, that's
and
working then.
Yeah,
Nice.
like you guys are my instant new favorites. Like, yeah.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah.
They have to make sure you have to send John Birmingham like $1 every time you call them your favorite at that point. That's just the way it is.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so much of my sort of internet colloquialisms I think have been drawn either from SO2KB or John. Like with the walk of shame, like it's gotten to the point where like at work and in conversations with friends, when I'm not 100% sure about what I'm talking about, I'd be like, look, this might be a walk of shame, but and they're like, no idea what is a walk of shame. Yeah.
I didn't know it had two meanings. I only found out at the end of last year that the walk of shame had a dating connotation. I had no idea.
Yes.
So for years and years and years, I used this term because I just thought it was a fun term. And then suddenly someone was like, "Oh," they pointed out, and I was like, "Pardon, what?" "Oh yeah, walk of shame. It means like you end up with someone's place and then you sort of walk shamefully home." And I was like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Never heard it. All these years, I mean, happily calling part of my podcast the walk of shame without realizing there's this kind of weirdly sexy side sort of version of it. We're like, oh, that's fair enough.
Looking back, does the reference still work?
It's fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's okay. But it's just sort of like, I just didn't realize. I didn't know there was a thing. I didn't realize that it could be taken that way. I was like, whoops. Oh, fair enough. Oh, well.
But yeah, so sorry, Steve. Steve has not listened to Smart Enough, so he doesn't.
Fair enough. I wouldn't either. It's rubbish. Totally. Just gibbering.
He's not all fey with all the in jokes and stuff.
Oh, that's fine then. Good man. Stay clear.
But the walk of shame is when, like, if Greg gets something wrong, then the listeners are encouraged to write to Dan and correct Greg, and then Dan gets to shame Greg.
Yes,
so,
but we do ask our listeners. You
that.
Can't just say you got it wrong. You got to do a bit of research and explain how
you got to prove it.
Yes, yeah.
Be specific. Okay.
And we check it, as well. And we're a little bit mean sometimes with our listeners, but they're like, you blah, blah, blah. And then you look into it and you're like, no, we didn't. So, and then we have to like walk this fine line between crapping on our really nice audience, but you also kind of want to go, here's the thought process and why they thought this and why that leads to something. And it's fun. It's good.
Yes.
Nice.
I was like, absolute highlight of my listening experience was an I walk of shame to you about cats. It was the best.
Ooh, about cats.
Yes.
Right,
That's my one area of expertise.
I was going to say that makes total sense, actually.
Yes, Greg very foolishly said that cats were like the second animal that was domesticated. And as soon as you heard that, I went, no, they didn't. They domesticated themselves. We didn't do shit.
Yeah.
We haven't.
Self-domestic. Exactly. They just came in one day and wouldn't leave.
Yeah. It's how I got my one of my cats. He just walked into my house and just went, yes, well, this will do nicely. You may feed me now.
It's like domesticating a bikie. It's like they just break into your house. You didn't really domesticate it. They just chose to take over your house.
Pretty much.
Residence.
That's it.
That's right. Yeah. And you're like, we now live here. Okay.
Yeah,
sure.
This is my house now. I will graciously allow you to live here and feed me.
That's right. Yeah.
I'll take it.
We're quite proud of the fact that we actually have a lot of scientists in the Democrats they do a lot of our policy stuff. But what I wanted to do was bring you on as a non-scientist, even though you have a master's of astrophysics, so you are.
I'm not a research scientist. Yeah,
exactly.
So that kind of counts.
Yeah,
I'm not a research scientist. Yes,
because I was just thinking about this and thought, like, if you have a master's in astrophysics, are you actually an astrophysicist, or do you need to have?
Yes.
Are you? Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. Yes, I am, but I'm not But I mean, once again, like anything else, there are hierarchies, and people who do research would go, "No, you're not." And yes, but
you're kind of like a lapsed astrophysicist.
Well, that's right. Yes, that's exactly right. I now eat space fish on Fridays or something. That's right.
Are you into your 12th year now? You've just started
into a 12th year. Yeah, started a 12th year. Yeah.
So in podcast terms, you're basically immortal.
Basically, sometimes, very, very, very Methuselah. Yeah, we were around well before nearly every major podcast was around, and we weren't the first, obviously, but we were very, very early in the game, and we've just hung on, and now that's why we're reaping the benefits of over a decade of monthly podcasting, fortnightly podcasting.
Let's get back to you. Let's talk about how awesome you are.
Sure, thank you. It's my favorite topic.
So sorry about that. No, because I was saying to Steve, I thought my microphone was,
funnier.
Yeah.
I thought my microphone was playing up, and so I pulled it out and plugged it into a different USB port, and then just chaos erupted. And it's like,
Nice.
oh God, what have I done?
You wrecked the internet.
Yeah, I broke the internet, and it's like,
Pretty much.
yeah. And the lesson here is never get your heroes onto your podcast because you'll make a complete fool of yourself. So.
You need to aim higher. Much, much higher. Like, really.